Hi, software engineers. Now that you've learned about plan-driven and agile methodologies, it's time to start trying to figure out, well, how do we know what we're going to do if we're on a team? What makes the most sense? Remember when I said that no process is just all the way plan-driven or all the way agile? Everything exists in a continuum. Sometimes you're going to have a more plan-driven process. Sometimes you're going to have something that's more agile. But even then, a plan-driven process could do some of the extreme programming things like pair programming or test-driven development. And agile, well, sometimes you need to have more documentation if you have a distributed team. So, the researchers of Boehm and Turner came up with this. This is the polar chart, as I'll refer to it for the rest of the semester. And this chart is a way of kind of visually figuring out what sort of development methodology should you use. More plan-driven, more agile. Now, if you look at this in the slides, there's a little bit more information, but the basic idea is if the area is small, then you're more agile. If the area is larger, then you're more plan-driven. So let's see what that looks like. So let's go through each of these axes and figure out how we get the number here. Now, this axis, the dynamism axis, well, I mean, that's the one we started with, right? Remember back when I said, if you're trying to think of one thing that's going to make you want to do plan-driven or agile, the first thing you should think of is, what's the requirements velocity? How much change is going to happen? How much dynamism to those requirements? In order to do good plan-driven, you have to have stable requirements. If you don't have stable requirements, you're going to spend all this extra time working on documentation just to have to change it. So we have to have stable requirements. That's why if you're going to be more plan-driven, you'd be more towards this end of the axis. If you're going to be more agile, you could be more towards this end with almost half of the requirements constantly changing. Culture. Now, this is not, if you're more agile, it's like, yes, we are chaos. I mean, that's just, excuse me, it's a little silly, thriving on chaos versus order. And there's not like oh, your team has beanbag chairs. That's at least plus 5% chaos. I mean, this really is kind of a gut feel sort of maneuver. If you're cool with just kind of people coming in later to the office, working from home a lot. Well, let's not get into that. That's everyone right now. No office space. Everyone's got shared space. That kind of more startup-y vibe, that's leaning more on chaos. That's going to put you more agile versus your stereotypical cubicle farm, yada yada yada. That's what this is getting towards. So in general, if you're going to be more stodgy, I guess it's stereotypical, but that's going to lean more towards the 10% chaos versus order versus 9. Size. So this is, well, the size of the development team. You don't necessarily need to take into account things like HR personnel. This is who you're going to be splitting up in order to build the software. So notice that it goes 3, 10, 30, 100, 300, which is not a linear scale. And that's mainly because you hit breakpoint. So I see this when I'm teaching a class. If I'm teaching a class of 10 people, well, that's different than teaching a class of 25 people. But teaching a class of 25 is no different than teaching 30, honestly. But 25 to 50 or 60, now that's a jump. And then 60 to 120, that's a jump. And then 120, you get the idea. So the smaller the team that you have, if you have a little team of 3 people, you're not using plan-driven. That definitely is going to lean more agile. And you can see it starts jumping to down here, 100 to 300. You're really aiming for something more plan-driven in order to keep people on task, following the same, line of thinking. Now, when we are looking at this, if you say, oh, there's 42 people, and you start measuring up 42 right there, and you think we're going to get out some sort of measuring device to ensure you got that exactly right. That's not true. This is very ballparky. This is meant to be kind of a shorthand way of figuring this out. Criticality. Okay. What is the effect of the software failing? So You've probably heard stories about people at Google, this whole like, oh, you can use 10% of your time to work on personal projects and yada, yada, yada. I don't know how much of that is true anymore, but that was kind of a thing, at least a while ago. If you're working on a throwaway project, nothing against your software, but if you're working on a project that doesn't really matter towards the bottom line of the company, it's something you're doing for fun, that's comfort. So Agile basically lends itself more towards these kind of, hey, I just need to put something together. Let's try it out. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work, because you don't want to go to the extra overhead of doing documentation and all the other setup stuff that plan-driven needs. So in general, Agile is better for, lower criticality sort of stuff. So discretionary funds is referring to a product that is not the main line of income for the company, but it's nice to have. So let's say, for instance, you have a standard like a Mac OS app, something very, that's your bread and butter. That's where you make most of the money. But then you decide to add in a small iOS app that's a companion app, something like that you sell for a couple bucks on the App Store. That's discretionary funds. That's something that's really nice to have, but if it went away, the company wouldn't go away. Essential funds would be that Mac OS app. It would be the thing that if this fails, well, then the company is going to be in trouble. Okay, as in monetarily in trouble. You're in trouble as far if you're a self-employed developer. So essential funds is where things start really getting, okay, if this messes up, there are more serious consequences. And then all of a sudden we switch over to lives, which is super uncomfortable sometimes, I understand, but then you start thinking that, okay, well, what's worse than our company going out of business? Oh, how about people dying? Yeah, I mean, we do build software where if it goes wrong, really bad things happen. So single life, and of course all the way up to many lives, which is also really uncomfortable. But let's make sure we keep all this in perspective. The criticality here is talking about kind of the most likely scenario. It's not talking about the 1 in a million, 1 in a trillion chance. So here's an example. So no shocker, I'm going to ask you to do polar charts. We're going to do one in a second. It's going to be a guided practice. It's going to be on quiz 1. I gave an example once where it was the software was the little box that goes with a hot water heater. Okay, it's the software for making sure the water stays warm so you can take nice hot showers. It seemed like a pretty straightforward thing to me. If you think about it, if this is a company that this is what they build, well, then it's essential fund, right? I mean, if this is their thing, if it doesn't work, then they don't make money. Okay. I had more than one person make the argument on the test that if the software fails spectacularly and increases the water pressure, the heat in the boiler, in the water heater, exponentially high, the pressure gets larger and larger and larger, the hot water heater explodes, starting a fire, which then spreads to the neighborhood and kills dozens of people. That's not the usual case. I mean, in any piece of software, you could come up with some sort of incredible alternate reality scenario. But in reality, if that software fails, you're probably going to have a cold shower. Or it's going to somehow damage the water heater but you also have to imagine the water heater has a fail-safe on it. If it starts getting too high, it shuts off, or it doesn't allow it to go in. I mean, so don't let your imagination run wild with these things. Really think about what really is, if the software fails, what's the most likely thing that's going to happen? The last one is personnel, and this one always seems to confuse students. Let's just say that level 1B, these are novices, and these are experts. I'm just going to put XP for expert. Okay. Now, all this is saying is that down here, you don't have many novices, and you have a pretty good number of experienced people. And up here, you have more novices than you have experienced people. That's all this is trying to say. So this is less experience. This is more experience. Okay? So, on a development team, if most of your team are experienced people, you can be more agile. If most of your people are novices, then it tends to be better to be plan driven because you can give more specific instruction. That's all that's getting at. Okay. So let's back all these back out one more time. Okay. So dynamism. How much requirements change is there? Okay. It goes from if there's no change or very little change at the very far outside to a lot of change on the inside. Culture versus chaos versus order. More cube farm is farther out. More beanbag chair is further in. Size. Smaller team is closer in. Bigger team is further out. Criticality. Project that doesn't matter at all. And if it fails, who cares? Goes further in. To death of many people goes further out. And then for personnel, more experienced, closer to the inside, less experienced, further out. And what we come up with is if we say that, okay, it's about half and half with about pretty good amount of requirements change. We like us some chaos. Maybe a team of 10 people and it's essential funds. We draw this. And in general, we see that this has a small area. So this would lead us to say this team should probably be more agile. And you would make that argument by saying, okay, because of the personnel level, it's about half and half. So we have a good mix of experienced people and novices. The experienced people could help the novices learn the ropes. We have a high degree of requirements change. Therefore, it would be impractical to be plan driven. So that's a very high indicator we should be more agile. The team itself, their culture is more chaotic, more able to handle change. It's a small team, even though it's essential funds, which might lead us to say more plan driven. Because of the mix of the other areas, this should be more agile. That's how you use this. That's how we expect you to use it, and that's how we expect you to go about explaining some of these examples. And speaking of examples, let's look at this one. The link to this is in the comments for the YouTube video. It is also in the lecture notes posted at cs3240.cs.virginia.edu. This is the scenario for quizzes 1 and 2 from spring of 2020. Okay, so in this scenario, we give an example of a project team, a company, and also the project that they're building. So I'm going to pause, or I want you to pause, and I want you to go find this diagram or this description. I want you to read it. Okay, so pause the video, go read this, come back, and then we're going to talk about how we would break this down. So go. The diagram to the polar chart itself. Let's see if we can figure out where each of these axes are going to get hit by this particular project. So first off, let's do dynamism. The National Park Service is giving you a contract. Let's go under the assumption that probably they know what they want. And this is, they might have some changes, but in general, probably right about there. I'm making a little bit of a guess here, but probably around 5%-ish. Not much. Okay. Let's look at your team. So we know there were about 15 software developers. That's right about here. You don't really have to worry about office managers and HR team and that sort of thing. We're kind of talking about the number of people working on the project, the software side of the project, like coding the project. So probably around there. Am I going to come in with some sort of ruler? No, I would never do that. What is their culture? Okay. Admittedly, I try to make this one a little bit too obvious because students get hung up on, oh, but they all have to bring a water bottle. So does that mean it's more orderly because they can't? Look, I said they had a climbing wall in their office. I mean, let's call a duck a duck. I'm trying to point it that these folks are, they're ready to, they're chaotic good. Yeah. Okay. Personnel. Remember, more novice is up here toward the top, more experience is toward the bottom. they're hiring a bunch of recent grads, but they have folks that have been there before. We could probably make an argument that it's kind of somewhere here in the middle. That's fine. I mean, as long as you didn't put it all the way at the top or all the way at the bottom, you're probably okay. Okay, now let's talk about criticality. Let's lop off the ends here. First off, is this a comfort project? No, this is a serious project with the federal government. This is not just comfort. So let's not say it's that. How about many lives? Would many lives be lost if the software failed? Okay. In reality, no. Many lives will not be lost. You could make some pretty outlandish argument that if the software fails all at the same time, thousands of people are on the Appalachia Trail and they all walk into a cliff or something. I don't know, but that's not kind of what we're looking at here. Okay. Is it discretionary fund? I mean, they still have their normal app, so they're still making some money, but really, if you lose the contract with the National Park Service, that's probably going to affect your overall business, so it's probably more than that. Single life. Oh, I mean, again, you could make the argument that, one time something could potentially happen, so, okay. And then essential fund. I mean, this is a major contract with a government agency that could potentially lead to more work. So we could argue, yeah, it's probably essential fund. So I would feel comfortable if you put something kind of in this general range. That's probably. So we connect the dots like this. And we get something that is in the middle, which is what's going to happen a lot of the time. I mean, there's going to be the projects where you're by yourself, you're writing a single Django app that helps you come up with a grocery list or something like that. And that's probably Agile. Or you're going to be building pacemaker software for an artificial heart. That's probably plan-driven. Most software fits somewhere in the middle here. So the question is, looking at this, what argument do you make? How do you go to a manager and say, look, based upon my experience as a software engineer, this is what I think we should do? Well, thinking about this team, they're a smaller team that obviously works kind of loose, right? And, their experience level, they're comfortable with this. The project itself would be more plan driven, right? As in, you don't expect much requirements change. There is a level of criticality to it. It probably will have to go through some sort of approval process. Now, it's not like you're going to have to take it to the FDA, but someone at the federal government in the National Park Service will probably have to give it a stamp of approval before it's ever released. So there is some level of approval. So you could say, I would argue that this should be more of an agile environment, but the team has a written contract and has a more specified requirements list that is approved by the National Park Service that they use for their sprint backlog, for their project backlog in the building of the software. So their actual day-to-day routine, the building aspect of it, is more agile, but kind of around that is a plan-driven shell so that they can interact with the National Park Service. It is very common to have to think about what is this project with this team and how does that make sense? This team has been working in an agile environment since they started in building the iOS app. To instantly tell this team, no, now you're going to be doing rational unified process and now you need an inception phase and all this, and there's only 15 people, and they're a group that works kind of more, hey, let's work by the feel of it. You're going to get a revolt effectively amongst the team. That won't work. This team needs a more agile environment to be happy and be productive. Even if you say, okay, team, look, we're working with the National Park Service. We're not going to have access to a customer 24/7. We're not going to be able to get feedback very quickly. We're going to need to have to work off this document and do the best that we can. That is a completely reasonable argument, and that's what we expect you to be able to do. We expect you to be able to read a scenario like this, fill out a chart, and use that information to make a coherent, reasonable argument why a team should be more plan-driven or more agile. You have to pick one. Is it going to be more agile, more plan-driven? But you can say, It's this with some of these trappings around it because X, Y, and Z. And you can't just say, because the size is 15 and the criticality is essential and the personnel is this and the dynamism is, therefore it should be agile. That doesn't work. You need to explain, because the dynamism is at 5%, we know that there is the ability to be more plan driven because there is, you have to explain. Okay? So, the guided practice coming up this week, we're going to give you another scenario. You're going to do this chart, and that's what you're going to submit. And then when we release the quiz, yeah, there's going to be another one of these, because this is kind of the core part of the software process unit is, do you understand plan driven versus agile, and can you figure out what you should be doing? So there you go. I hope that helps. Thanks for hanging out. Always great to have you. Bye.